Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today for this conversation on immigration at a historic moment for our country as we continue to celebrate America's 250th anniversary. Our discussion today will explore what it means to tell the American story honestly and how immigrants have helped build the faith communities, economy, and national security we rely on today. First, before we jump into the conversation, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists. And for those that don't know me, I'm Adam Estel, Senior Vice President at the Forum. Our panelists today, the first one is Galen Carey, the Vice President of Government Relations at the National Association of Evangelicals and a leader of the Evangelical Immigration Table. Galen is responsible for representing the NAE before Congress, the White House, and the courts. He works to advance the approach and principles of the NAE document for the health of the nation, which, if you have not read, is a really helpful document. He is also co-author with Leith Anderson of Faith in the Voting Booth. Before joining the NAE, Carey was a longtime employee of World Relief, the relief and development arm of the NAE, serving in Croatia, Mozambique, Kenya, Indonesia, and Burundi. Lots of interesting places. He received an MDiv from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School and a Doctor of Ministry from McCormick Theological Seminary. So glad to have you here today, Galen.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Margaret Stock. She is a member of the Council on National Security and Immigration and an immigration attorney in Alaska. She focuses her practice on immigration and citizenship law and is a nationally known expert on immigration and national security laws. Margaret has testified regularly before congressional committees on immigration, homeland security, and military matters. As a retired lieutenant colonel in the military police, U.S. Army Reserve, Margaret has extensive experience with U.S. military issues. She has also worked as a professor at the United States Military Academy at West Point and as an adjunct instructor at the University of Alaska. Margaret has served on the board of the Federal Bar Association's Immigration Law Section and is a former member of the American Bar Association's Commission on Immigration. And in 2013, she was named a MacArthur Foundation Fellow. Welcome, Margaret. And last but certainly not least is Stuart Anderson. Stuart is the executive director of the National Foundation for American Policy, an Arlington, Virginia-based nonpartisan public policy research organization focusing on trade, immigration, and related issues. From August 2001 to January 2003, Stuart served as Executive Associate Commissioner for Policy and Planning and Counselor to the Commissioner at the Immigration and Naturalization Service. Before holding those positions, Stuart spent 4.5 years on Capitol Hill on the Senate Immigration Subcommittee, first for Senator Spencer Abraham, and then as staff director of the subcommittee for Senator Sam Brownback. Prior to that, Anderson was director of trade and immigration studies at the Cato Institute in Washington, D.C., where he produced reports on the military contributions of immigrants and the role of immigrants in high technology. So as you can see, we have three very distinguished panelists today that we're really excited to allow you to hear from. So I'm going to open up our conversation with some questions to each of our panelists. If you do have questions throughout the event, please put them in the Q&A function of the webinar, and we will get to those in a little bit. So let's start with you, Galen. The National Association of Evangelicals works at the intersection of faith and immigration, among other issues, of course. What does the evangelical community's experience tell us about why immigrants matter to the church in America today?
Well, thank you, Adam, for that question, and thank you for organizing this important webinar. And it's a joy to be with you. I would say, first of all, we would, as evangelical Christians, we would start by saying that immigrants are not a population somewhere out there. Immigrants are us. We all have an immigration story, of course, but many evangelical Christians are recent immigrants, even first-generation immigrants. So they're part of our churches, and in fact, in many cases, they're part of our churches that are most dynamic, vital, and growing, and they bring a great deal to us. You're going to hear from others that immigrants are are a blessing to us economically and culturally and so on. That's certainly true. They have done a great deal to help build up the prosperity that we all are heirs to as citizens here in the United States. But I want to emphasize that immigrants are a spiritual blessing to not only to our churches, but to our country. So immigrants, many of them bring a very strong faith with them, but that faith then has been, in many cases, tested through fiery trials, suffering, persecution, deprivation, abuse, all kinds of things that try people's souls. And many immigrants have come through those trials with their faith greatly deepened. And that's something that all of us are learning from, that are blessed to have immigrants as part of our congregations. So we are ourselves able to deepen our own faith because of our relationship with immigrant brothers and sisters. We have in just one of our denominations I was recently learning about, just one denomination, they have worship every week in 38 different languages. So there are people, not just in English and Spanish, but there's people worshiping in Haitian Creole and in Hindi and Russian and Swahili. The list goes on. People from all over the world are worshiping God in their own languages, as well as being part of multilingual and multicultural congregations. So that's our first thing I want to emphasize, that immigrants are us and they are a blessing to us. Then as well, immigrants present to us an opportunity and a challenge, because we have, in this moment that we're living through right now, we have a very challenging environment for immigrants. It's not an easy time to be an immigrant in America. There's a level of rhetoric that we hear in social media, even from our elected officials, that oftentimes is quite negative. And that has then built up support for policies that are quite negative. And all of that is a challenge in a couple of ways. One is that as people around us are suffering, we suffer with them. So we put out a report about a year ago called One Part of the Body, in which we look at the threat of mass deportation for our immigrant brothers and sisters. And we find that something like 1 in 12 people, Christians in the United States, are at risk of deportation. And for Catholic Christians, it's an even higher ratio, about 1 in 5. So if the deportation plans are carried out in full, we may see more than 1 million people deported. Just for example, with the Haitian immigrants who may lose their TPS, or are losing their TPS status, there may be as many as 50,000 U.S. citizen children who will have one or both parents taken away. And so the challenges there are obvious and multiple. One is to stand with and sit with and be with our brothers and sisters as they go through this. Another is to provide practical help, the people who are no longer able legally to work, and so they need ways to be supported. There are cases where already parents have been separated from their children. Well, what happens to the children and who steps up to care for them? That's a place where, as Christians, we have the opportunity, and it is a joy, certainly is a joy, to stand with our brothers and sisters, as difficult as it is. So this is, for us, maybe our test of faith. How do we respond to the kind of challenges that are there? And then we also have the challenge of how do we, in a positive and proactive way, how do we speak on behalf of the just needs of our fellow neighbors, to promote better policies and to encourage our leaders to live up to the beautiful and tremendous legacy, the legacy of the Statue of Liberty, that invites us and invites those who are fleeing persecution. Uh, we have the opportunity to speak up to try to get our refugee resettlement program restored. And in fact, many of the people who are in need of resettlement are Christians who've been persecuted for their faith. And we have a special concern for them, as well. We also care, of course, for people of all faiths. So all of these are ways in which, while you can frame this as difficult challenges, and they are, I wouldn't sugarcoat that at all, but it's also an opportunity for us to test our faith and to see how much can we, and when we put ourselves at God's disposal, that He can work through us in ways that we couldn't even imagine. So there's a lot of things to work on, a lot of things to look forward to.
Thank you so much, Galen. I've had the pleasure of being your friend and colleague for a long time and have heard you say a lot of those things before, but it's always great to be reminded of the positive impact of immigrants on our faith community that we share. I'll turn next to Margaret. Margaret, you have spent your career on the national security side of this issue and on the legal side of this issue. What's a connection between immigration policy and America's security that most people miss?
The big thing I think most people miss is that people are an asset, not a liability, and immigrants are people, and they've been essential to America's national security since 1775. We haven't won a war in the United States history without the contributions of immigrants. Since it's the 250th anniversary, I like to remind people of what's in the Declaration of Independence. And the founders knew that people were critical to the future America's national security. And that's why one of their grievances in the Declaration of Independence, a grievance that's well above the grievance about taxes that everybody is always talking about, was their grievance about immigration. And I'll just read it to everybody just in case you haven't looked at your declaration recently. One of our grievances against King George was that he has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither. So clearly, this was important in the minds of the founders that people were really important to the success of the future country. And they wanted a generous immigration policy. They didn't want unlimited immigration. They wanted to make sure that the right people were coming to America. But they did want to make America strong through the efforts of people who had tried really hard to come here, who were going to contribute to our economy and to our military. They wanted basically to get the best and the brightest and the most motivated people from all around the world, including refugees and people who were seeking a refuge in America for religious reasons. But they wanted these folks to come here because they knew that that was going to be the strength of the future America, e pluribus unum, from many one. And so people were not considered a bad thing. We've sort of shifted, I think, in the minds of the public today. We're focused on keeping everybody out of the country and getting rid of as many people as we can. And this is hurting our national security in the long run. It's going to be very, very bad. I think many of you are aware that because of our policies right now, we're seeing legal immigration dropping substantially. We also have a demographic crisis coming because we haven't solved the immigration problem. We're having replacement birth rate no longer happening in America, so our birth rate is falling. Some studies have projected that we're going to lose 100 million people from the US population in the coming decades because of policies that don't treat people as an asset anymore, but think of them as a liability. But the bottom line is that it's not about keeping people out of the United States. It's about letting the right people into the United States, people that we want because they share our values, people who are motivated, people who want to succeed. And that's always been the promise of America. People dream of being part of the American experience, and that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. We should celebrate the fact that most of the world wants to come here. That's positive. That's not negative. Other countries don't have that asset that we've had. Long time ago, a scholar at Harvard, Joseph Nye, called this soft power because it's more powerful than guns and bullets and bombs. This idea that people can come here and make something of themselves and be part of this great American experience. It's been the source of our national security for several hundred years now that people want to be part of this American dream and want to be part of ourselves. In my involvement with the military, I've also learned over the years and I know Stuart will probably talk about this as well, that immigrants have been absolutely essential to the success of the U.S. Armed Forces. And again, we haven't won a war without the contributions of immigrants. This started with the Continental Army. You probably know about Alexander Hamilton. Well, he was an immigrant. At Valley Forge, George Washington relied on many, many, many thousands of immigrants to help with the fight against the British. Many of them, ironically, German-speaking immigrants at the time. He didn't even have to have a translator for Baron von Steuben's orders because the immigrants in Pennsylvania spoke German and could understand the Baron without a translator. Throughout the Civil War, the Union Army heavily relied on immigrants. There's legendary stories about the Irish coming over from England, and they were actually fleeing the British and joining the Union Army to fight in the Civil War. And of course, the South also had immigrants on their side, but not as many as the North. So we know how that turned out. And then immigrants continued to serve in the 1800s through in the military. World War I, they were about 18 to 20% of the U.S. Armed Forces. In World War II, the contributions of immigrants were absolutely essential. I like to tell people to read the book Sons and Soldiers, which talks about refugees from Germany who came to the United States, German Jewish refugees, and they were drafted into the U.S. military. They were made into citizens through military naturalization, and they were responsible for more than 60% of the actionable intelligence on the Western Front in World War II. We probably would have lost the Battle of the Bulge without these immigrants and their contributions. So that's just a quick and broad overview, but basically immigrants are essential to national security. And because we haven't been able to fix the legal immigration system and make it work firmly and fairly, we're now facing a potential crisis where we're just not going to have enough of the right kind of people to stay a superpower. Thank you, and I'll turn things back to you, Adam.
Thanks, Margaret. I always learn so much when you share about our military history and the impact of immigrants. It's incredible. Okay, so Stuart, now turning to you. You've tracked immigration's economic impact for years. What are some ways that immigrants are a benefit to the U.S. economy?
Well, the big picture is that immigrants are extremely valuable to the economy. I'm going to talk a little bit about economic growth at first, because a lot of people don't realize, but if a country does not have economic growth, you essentially do not have improving living standards from year to year. So essentially you have just stagnation. And economic growth consists of labor force growth and growth in productivity. And immigrants are crucial to both. In fact, from 2014 to 2024, immigrants were responsible for approximately half of all the labor force growth in the United States. But right now, as Margaret alluded to, the U.S. labor force has largely stopped growing. And that's partly due to demographics. Babies, not as many babies were born 20 or more years ago. But it's also partly due to really an enthusiastic policy by the Trump administration to remove people from the labor force. I mean, they're showing videos of taking people off of roofs and pulling people out of car washes and other type of social media videos. But you also have, as Galen alluded to, people being removed from the legal workforce by eliminating temporary protected status, whether it's for Haitians, Venezuelans, or others. You also saw work authorization removed for people with humanitarian parole. And then we've also seen new people blocked from coming into the country. For example, through refugee policy. We essentially have no refugees coming to the United States, except, amazingly, only white people from South Africa. I never thought I'd say that sentence, but that's actually the U.S. policy right now. In addition, we're banning the entry of immigrants and temporary visa holders from 39 countries. And we're not even processing many of these people inside the country as well. So when you add it all up, you're getting far fewer people. And in fact, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the number of foreign-born workers declined by approximately 1.4 million from January 2025 to June 2026. Now, the theory behind this was that that would help U.S.-born workers. That's been Stephen Miller and other folks who I think they sincerely believe that this would be a beneficial policy for U.S.-born workers. But it turns out it's not the case. That we've actually seen the unemployment rate for U.S.-born workers increase from 4.6% in June 2026, from 4.4% a year earlier, and from 4.3% in January 2025 when Donald Trump took office. And one of the reasons, and I always want to mention why this is, because it's a little surprising for people when if they think of things as being very zero sum. But if you have a business and businesses find there's not enough workers, they don't expand that business. And in fact, we also find that entrepreneurs don't seek out new opportunities, or if they do find them, they do much less of them than they would otherwise because of the lack of workers. That's why you don't see the benefits accrue to U.S.-born workers just because you eliminate the flow of U.S.-born workers. And we found that the potential labor loss to the U.S. economy could be approximately 19 million worker years by 2028 and 102 million worker years by 2035 if the policy continues. And we estimate that annual economic growth would probably drop by approximately 1/3 over this time period. Now, foreign-born high-skilled professionals are also very important for productivity growth, which is the other part of the equation on economic growth. And up to 1/6 of U.S. economic growth over a 20-year period came through productivity gains that high-skilled foreign-born workers in science and engineering were responsible for, according to research by Galen Carey and others. Despite this, the Trump administration's opposed a policy of $100,000 fee on H-1B visa holders and a variety of other measures, restricting even international students. In fact, there was a new rule that was finalized today that limits the time period in which international students can stay here. Now, it's also important to note that immigrants, in addition to this macro fact, also immigrants are very essential in filling niches in the labor market. And that's something really that more of us see on a daily basis rather than sort of the big picture thing that economists may study. When you look at construction, restaurant, healthcare, and other fields, immigrants are filling in a lot of these jobs. For example, there's research that shows a 10 percentage point increase in the immigrant population area reduces by 29% the probability that someone 65 years or older would live in a nursing home or other institutional setting. Now, that's very significant for people who have parents and others, that recognize, the difference that might be in someone's quality of life. For example, about 26% of physicians and surgeons are foreign-born, 40% of home health aides are foreign-born. And I want to mention something else about refugees and family immigrants. They also are great at filling niches because they don't come here to accept specific jobs. People always think it's great that someone comes to be sponsored, and it often does work out very well. But what we found is that refugees and family immigrants actually have higher income growth than U.S.-born workers. And one of the reasons for that is they get here, they didn't come for a specific job, they survey the labor market and seek whatever extra training or education they may need to fill in niches where they may be needed. Now, on another part of the economic spectrum, we find that research that we just released about a month ago, that immigrants have founded or co-founded 59% of America's privately held startup companies valued at $1 billion or more. This is research I've been doing for really the past decade. And approximately 2/3 of U.S. billion-dollar companies were founded or co-founded by immigrants or the children of immigrants. The collective value of the 455 immigrant-founded billion-dollar companies is $5 trillion. That's more than the total market value of companies listed on the stock markets in all but 7 countries around the world, and that even includes Germany and the United Kingdom. And really, the number goes to over $6 trillion if one includes immigrant-founded companies that have gone public. In other words, been publicly traded on the stock market since 2016. And the average number of employees per company is about 833 for these companies. Now, I've conducted hundreds of interviews over the years with immigrants and found the typical immigrant views America, much like Ben Liu, who's one of the billion-dollar startup companies. He founded Formation Bio, which is a company valued at 150 employees. It's valued at over $1.8 billion. They do cutting-edge research on bringing new pharmaceutical drugs to the market. And Ben immigrated to America when he was just a child from Taiwan. And he told me, and I'm going to read this quote, that I think the United States is the best place in the world to build something ambitious. I am so grateful to my parents for the decision to come to the United States. I'm going to close on 2 final points. One is that almost everyone who comes to America through the legal immigration system is here because an American wanted them here. They're either, whether someone wants to employ them, marry them, or live with them, such as a relative. So really, immigration restrictions are not so much restrictions on immigrants as they're restrictions on Americans. And since we're in the anniversary mood here, about 250 years ago, I would note that if the colonies had imposed strict immigration policies, they would have likely prevented an immigrant named Thomas Paine from coming to America. Now, he is someone who is an immigrant who assimilated so quickly that he wrote Common Sense and prevented the arguments for separating from the country he had just left 16 months ago. And those became obviously the crucial arguments for independence. And as Margaret alluded to Valley Forge, during dire circumstances after 1776, Thomas Paine wrote The Crisis with the words, "These are times that try men's souls." And I think if Thomas Paine were alive today and he viewed immigration policy, he might repeat those words today. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Stuart. So much to take away from that. Really appreciate that. I think the perspective that restrictions on immigrants are really restrictions on Americans is something that we don't lean into enough. So thank you for that. Okay, so let's continue the conversation. I'm gonna direct these questions to one of our panelists, but again, any of them are welcome to weigh in. So let's go back to Margaret. We're asking Congress to pass a fair, firm, and compassionate immigration solution as part of this 250th anniversary effort. So from a national security standpoint, what would a firm but fair immigration system actually look like if it were designed to make us safer?
Well, we want a system that works, that doesn't drown people in red tape and bureaucracy and make it impossible for people with good intentions to immigrate legally to the United States. And right now, we have a mess on our hands. We have laws that have been set up by Congress over the decades that conflict with each other, that don't make any sense, that don't allow people to have a permanent legal pathway to come here. And therefore, they don't help our security because we're spending all of our time basically doing things that don't make any economic sense, like locking up healthcare workers in detention centers and paying private prison companies to keep them locked up so they can't go to work, even though they haven't committed any crimes. And TPS is a good example. TPS is a temporary protected status that's been given to multiple countries over the years. It allows people to be here in the United States and work because of some conflict or disaster in their home country. But Congress has never come up with a long-term solution to people who have TPS when their TPS runs out or expires or gets terminated. And this is clearly something that Congress could have addressed a long time ago. They used to address it with adjustment acts. For example, Liberian adjustment was a possibility for people from Liberia who'd had deferred and forced departure and TPS for a really long time. But Congress has fallen down in terms of passing legislation that makes sense. They just haven't been able to do it. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that later. Another one is the Afghan Adjustment Act. It makes no sense to have brought all of our allies from Afghanistan and not give them any way to stay permanently in America, not giving them legal status, not letting them be able to work. This is causing tremendous stress and turmoil in the Afghan community and in other communities that have had TPS. DHS recently announced they were terminating TPS for certain countries, and all the folks from those countries needed to, quote, get legal somehow, but without announcing that there was any pathway for them to do so, that really made no sense. So we're now looking at hundreds of thousands of people who have been valuable workers in our economy, who are filling not just niche jobs, but essential jobs in the economy. Healthcare, teaching, aircraft mechanics, service industry, just all kinds of jobs out there that have labor shortages right now. And these folks are now being told that they can no longer work in the United States, and they're potentially going to get deported to a country that has a war going on or that is considered extremely dangerous by the State Department. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And it tells me that we just don't value people anymore. We think that they're not an asset for whatever reason. That's a mistake. We should be looking at these individuals and saying these people are people who can contribute to America. They can work hard. They can make something of themselves, just like our ancestors did. And we should have a pathway in the legal system for them to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Margaret. Stuart or Galen, any thoughts on what a fair, firm, compassionate immigration system should look like? Galen?
Well, yeah, I would just add, it should definitely reinstate the Statue of Liberty, and there should be a way for people who are needing protection to seek that, ask for the protection. With the refugee resettlement program that was officially stood up in 1980, there was a process for doing that overseas. So people could apply and be vetted and screened and prepared, and then the ones who met the standards that we were had set up would then they'd be actually given a loan. So with their own money, they could fly to the U.S. and then they would be given help, a lot of it through churches, to help them resettle. Something like that needs to be stood up, and then for those who are already here, some way for those who really are in dire straits, should they have to go back to their country, to be able to make their case.
Well, Adam, I think the two of the more common sense reforms would be one, to allow for work permits for people from other countries to come in and work legally. That would prevent people from coming in illegally. It would actually also relieve what we saw at the border with people applying for asylum when they maybe just had difficult circumstances in their home country, but wouldn't necessarily individually qualify under the asylum law. If you gave people a chance to work and they didn't have to be in a bad situation or dangerous situation in the country, that would satisfy their protection needs and also help fill a labor need in the United States. And within that, we could do some transitions that would help some of these people who are having expiring TPS. And the second reform, which actually passed the House of Representatives, but was blocked by Senator Grassley from being included in the CHIPS Act when that passed Congress, would be to exempt from the green card limits people with master's degree or higher from in a STEM field from a U.S. university, or even abroad if it was a PhD. Actually, I think the way the legislation is written, also to have an immigrant entrepreneur visa as well. Again, these are not radical ideas. These are very straightforward ideas, but they would do a great deal of good.
Excellent. Thanks to all of you. Stuart, let's stay with you. You mentioned a little bit of this in your opening remarks, but I wondered if you could get a little bit deeper on what happens to American businesses and communities when the visa or work authorization pipeline breaks down, like we're seeing now, and as we've seen most recently with TPS terminations?
Well, what you're what you're going to see and what you're already seeing is individuals who were receiving care, for example, from people as home health aides or nurses, would no longer be able to receive that care because the people aren't going to be allowed to work in the United States. In addition, businesses will have trouble maintaining their current contracts or expanding. I think you already saw this in Texas with construction starting to be limited with the deportations, and it's the same principle. Uh, Again, it makes no sense as an economic policy to aggressively be trying to remove people from labor force. In this case, this isn't even deportations of people who are in the country unlawfully. These were people who are actually in legal status, or not technically a status, in some cases, they were status, but they had lawful right to work, and you're just removing them from the labor market. And I don't know how many people read the actual justification for ending TPS from Venezuela, Haiti, but they would not even have passed a freshman college class. The one from Venezuela had actually no footnotes when it came to justifying the current conditions in Venezuela that permitted people from coming in. And the Haiti one, which came a little later, improved on that by having one footnote. And the only thing it referred to was the fact that there had been a UN police force that went in some months before, but everyone knows that UN police force was not, did not really do much, such that when people were traveling to Haiti under UN auspices, they couldn't even like land their aircraft in the capital in many cases, or they actually had to take a helicopter to get across because you couldn't drive cars. And so to send people back to these situations, makes absolutely no sense if you actually are trying to abide by what the law says, which is it safe for people to return?
Thank you, Stuart. Margaret, I know this is what you deal with on a daily basis with your law practice. What does this breakdown of these pipelines look like for the people that you're trying to serve?
Well, it's chaos for employers. So employers don't know from one day to the next whether somebody's allowed to work for them or not without going to a DHS website and checking for the latest policy change. So you might have a worker that when they started working for you, their work permit was good for 5 years, and now all of a sudden DHS said, nope, it's no good anymore. You need to fire that worker. And it's just absolute chaos right now. Employers are between a rock and a hard place because they'll have a really great worker working for them and they want to keep that person working, and their business is dependent on having that person work. And now they're told they suddenly have to fire them. And of course, the worker can't pay rent anymore, can't go shopping anymore. In some cases, we've had people that had to set up GoFundMe campaigns to pay their rent because they're not allowed to work. They're allowed to be in the US because they're pursuing some status here, but they're not allowed to work, many of them. So this is just absolutely creating chaos. And it's chaotic in the military as well. The military is heavily dependent on green card holders for enlistment. The US military could not meet its recruiting goals without the green card holders. But the green card holders are told that if they join the military, they're going to get expedited citizenship. Well, this is normally the case. Congress said that you could do this, that if you join the military, you can get faster citizenship. But there's now been a ban imposed on certain countries, and the military recruits people with the promise of citizenship. And when they apply for citizenship now, they're told you're from one of these countries that we don't like anymore, so you can't get your citizenship. That means you can't be a ranger, you can't be a helicopter pilot, you can't be an officer, you can't be in any job that requires a security clearance. We're just putting you on hold for now, waiting to see if the policy is going to change so that you can get your American citizenship and then be deployable. People can't be deployed to their home country without American citizenship. So it's creating a lot of chaos in the military. And of course, in addition to the military members themselves, we have a lot of family members. I like to tell people that we're deployed in more than 120 countries around the globe, and our native-born American citizens who get deployed to those countries often meet and fall in love with foreigners, and they want to bring them back to the United States. which is natural. You want to have your family with you in America, correct? And this has been going on for, more than 100 years now, that troops deployed overseas have been falling in love and wanting to bring back their foreign family members. And right now, they can't in many cases. So we're seeing a crisis within the military morale where a troop will come into the legal office and go, hey, I want my wife and my kids to come to America. And the legal office will say, no, there's a policy. We don't let people from that country come to America anymore. And so the troop is like, well, what am I supposed to do? Can I quit the military and go live with my spouse overseas? What am I supposed to do? We've even oddly having a lot of people asking to be deployed overseas because that's the only way they can be with their families. But it's a chaotic situation right now, and I really hope that we'll come together as Americans and think about the demographics of what we're doing, looking at the big picture of how this is affecting not just our military, but the labor force in general and our economy in general, and how it's affecting individual Americans. I'm from Alaska, pretty small state. We're having out migration right now. We're having schools closed because we don't have enough kids to go to school anymore. We also have a teacher shortage. We have a big aircraft hub in Anchorage. It's a huge cargo airport, and we have a shortage of aircraft mechanics. Airlines are actually sending the planes overseas to get them fixed because we can't get enough aircraft mechanics inside the United States. Healthcare workers, big shortage. There's just a labor shortage in all kinds of areas of the economy right now, and there are not enough native-born Americans available, willing, and able to fill those jobs. It's just demographics, it's math.
Yeah. Thank you, Margaret. Galen, kind of a similar question. So faith communities are often the first responders, if you will, when immigration policy changes disrupt families in our communities overnight. What have you seen on the ground with Haitian TPS holders and others who've had their lives disrupted, who are a part of our faith communities?
Well, it's a very tragic situation, Adam. We see in churches, especially churches in communities where there are quite a few Haitians, have come together and they're doing what they can to provide emergency help, like food, shelter, that sort of thing, which is something that churches do as a matter of course. But in some places, the number of people is just really overwhelming. And so we've had people come to Washington to have vigils and to meet with their members of Congress and so on. That's also useful and important. There's just, I think, a lot of Americans, so even church people, who haven't heard about what's going on, and also, or they have been subjected to a rhetoric of fear. And in the church context, we often say that a church is in trouble when they stop looking for converts and start looking for heretics. And in some way, that's what our country is doing. We're looking for people to expel rather than looking for the people that can come and join us. And so it's a sign, in some ways, it's a sign of fear and weakness, but that then presents perverse incentives to our leaders to capitalize on that for short-term benefit, even though long-term it's probably not going to be good for them, their party, or for the country.
Thank you, Galen. So let's talk about solutions. Some of you have mentioned, that what could happen. I would say since we've been doing this Bibles, Badges, and Business for Immigration Reform work with the forum since about 2010, we've seen at least 5 major immigration reform efforts fail or stall in Congress. The DREAM Act, the Gang of Eight, lots of different DACA fixes, the Langford deal, a more recent Haiti TPS discharge petition, and we could go on and on about the failures. But my question is, why does a bipartisan, bicameral agreement on the substance of immigration reform keep failing to translate into actual votes to make it happen, in your opinions? Whoever wants to take the first stab. Oh, Stuart, you're muted, but go ahead.
I mean, when you get down to it, there is a difference of opinion that has emerged over the years, and particularly now, I think if you even a difference of opinion within the administration. I think if you actually listen to Donald Trump sometimes, he seems to think it's probably a pretty good thing if businesses had access to more workers, both at the high end and the low end. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like Donald Trump actually makes policy on immigration for the Trump administration, because it seems that I mean, he said extremely positive things about international students. Yeah, you've seen one policy after another come out that restricts international students. Something similar on H-1B visas we've seen as well. Uh, so I think right now the Trump administration is, their stated policy, which is probably mostly run, I think most people agree. And if you read the recent New York Times book, it documents it, that Stephen Miller is mostly running that policy. And he really doesn't think anyone should be coming into the country. And it's pretty hard to have a compromise on immigration policy if one side's policy is zero. Uh, so 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 I think that the current currently that's where it's become quite difficult. I think in a in a post-Trump era, would there be more opportunities? There might be. It depends. It depends how ingrained having a little to no immigration as a policy becomes within the Republican Party. And that has to do with a whole bunch of factors, including the types of things that the National Immigration Forum does, which is having different folks, businesses and religious leaders and others making their case for why it'd be beneficial to have a more balanced policy.
Well, to put it positively, I think President Trump has a real opportunity here because he has such impeccable credentials as an immigration hardliner that he could, if he so chose, he could say, okay, we won that, and now we're going to do this other great thing that will make everything even better. He could do that in kind of in the way that President Nixon did with opening relations with China because of his strong anti-communist credentials. So I think it's probably for him and his advisors maybe to contemplate, what is the opportunity here to do something that would be a real and lasting legacy if it was done well. And I think he could get bipartisan support for something like that.
Thanks, Galen. Margaret, any thoughts from you?
Well, my pet peeve is the law is broken and it doesn't make any sense anymore. We've built this complex web of dysfunctional laws. As one federal judge once said, it's King Minos's labyrinth in ancient Crete, and the laws just don't make sense. They contradict each other. We used to have some pretty logical laws, but Congress hasn't updated them. An example is the registry law. It's a really old law, and if you ask the average American whether people should be able to get a green card if they've lived in the US for a really long time, they have good character, they don't have a criminal record, they're paying their taxes, the average person would say, yes, somebody like that should be able to get a green card. If they speak English, they've lived here a really long time, they don't have a criminal record, why not let them have a green card? Well, we have a law in the books that says people like that can get a green card, but guess what? You have to have entered the United States before 1972 because Congress put a date in the law and said you had to come here before 1972. They haven't changed that date in decades. So it only benefits old people right now, really old people. Think about somebody who's been in the United States since 1972. It's not going to be a younger worker. It's going to be somebody approaching retirement age for the most part. Okay, Congress could fix that easily. All they got to do is change that date and update it, make it more recent. My pet date would probably be like make it 2022 or something, and that would solve a lot of our immigration problems. We wouldn't be spending billions of dollars locking people up on civil violations. This is not of net benefit to our economy that we're taking people out of the workforce, putting them in detention centers and feeding them 3 squares a day and providing them with medical care so that a private prison company can have their stock increase. this is a net drain on our economy. It's not productive work. It's not building cars or making computers or making airplanes or something. Just locking people up is a net sunk. It's bad for the economy to just be spending billions of dollars on that.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes and we have a lot of great questions from the audience. So I'm gonna jump to some of those. And again, any of you can jump in to answer. So one of our audience members mentioned that they are greatly distressed by the nativist trends of the current populist movement. And their question is, what can we do to engage constructively with the 30% or so of our population that agree with these nativist opinions? So this is what the forum is all about. How do we agree, or how do we find areas of agreement to move the conversation forward?
Well, I think first you have to treat people respectfully, take seriously their concerns. It doesn't help to start by saying, "Well, you must be racist or xenophobic." It needs time to have conversations, and many times people's views are informed by inaccurate or skewed information. That's one part of it. But then there are legitimate concerns that people need a chance in a space where they can raise those, and there are ways that those concerns can be addressed that don't necessarily involve locking up Haitian nurses in detention centers.
Thanks, Galen. Any other thoughts on how to engage constructively with folks who have bought the narrative that immigrants are bad for our country?
I think you tell them stories about people that they know and real stories about people. I think that's what convinces most people when you tell them the actual story of a live immigrant who's in their community. And a lot of the stories I tell people, they just can't believe the government's trying to deport the person. An example was today in Las Vegas. There's a woman in the paper today who's got a 9-year-old disabled American citizen child, and she's the only one who can take care of him. And her husband was actually brought into the US to help her take care of their child who was born by accident in the United States, but he's a US citizen. He's so profoundly disabled he can't get on an airplane, and he's now 9 years old, and the government's trying to deport the parents now. So the child's going to be left behind in Las Vegas in some kind of institution for the rest of his life, away from his parents who are going to get deported outside the country and separated from their child. It doesn't make any sense. In the past, we would never have done this. We would have let the parents live and work their lives in America and take care of their son. But we now have such a strict policy that parents of disabled kids are now getting deported and having to leave the kids behind in an institution in America. That's just terrible. It doesn't make any sense. It's not American values.
I mean, one of the ways I've tried to make the argument for folks is to point out, as you said, people who they might know, and you look at sports, for example. Very few people whose team won their league championship complained that the team had too many immigrants on the team. It just, when the Dodgers won with Shohei Ohtani and other players, including a pitcher who got the MVP, whose arm was so tired he couldn't even lift the MVP trophy because he had pitched so many innings so his team could win. I don't think you heard anyone in California complaining, or in Los Angeles anyway. Those immigrants, they took jobs from kind of average people who threw hard, who could or might be able to hit reasonably well. So,
Thanks, Stuart. Okay, another question. We haven't really addressed this, but the policies discouraging international students from studying in the U.S., how does that negatively impact our national and economic security?
There was just a new rule that was finalized today, that was published, that would limit how long a student take to complete their degree. If they don't finish within 4 years, including even for a PhD, they'd have to come back to the federal government and get permission to continue, which creates great uncertainty for someone. And it's very likely to discourage a lot of students from coming to the United States in the first place. I mean, our research has found that up to 80% of the full-time graduate students in key fields like computer and information services, for example, sciences, excuse me, are international students. When you're looking at 75 to 80% in different AI fields, the top 5 tech companies, when their H-1Bs are mostly aligned to AI, and about 80% of those are AI-related fields. So again, similar to the sports analogy, if you want to have highly competitive industries, highly competitive companies, you're almost definitely going to have foreign nationals as part of that.
Thanks, Stuart. I know, Margaret, you've written on this about competitiveness with China and others in regard to this.
Right. So this is benefiting our competitors because people who are seeking an education that their first choice might have been the United States, but if the US won't let them in, they're going to go somewhere else. So they're going to go to Canada or the UK or France or Spain or Australia or whatever other country has a higher education system that's worthy of their talents. And we're going to see more colleges and closing in America. I mean, that's been a phenomenon that's going on right now, in large part driven by policies that don't let these foreign students pay non-resident tuition. So they're paying a huge amount of money into the US economy just by being here and studying. They're not a drain on our resources at all. They're a huge asset. We're also seeing a phenomenon now where American universities are setting up branches overseas because they can't get students into the United States, but the students still want the cachet of going to, New York University. So New York University is going to set up a branch in Japan or whatever to accommodate foreign students who can't get visas to come to the US. That benefits the economy of Japan when the foreign students are going to school in Tokyo. It doesn't benefit the US economy. So we're again turning away a really big asset that we've had. Our higher education system has been the envy of the world, and in large part because it was very attractive to a lot of people to come to the US, and the dynamism that resulted from having people from all over the world at a university, is just incredible. I think many people in the audience have attended such a university where you had a lot of foreign students and you found it to be a really dynamic and interesting place to get an education. And it would have been much less of an education if those folks hadn't been part of the community of the higher education that you were experiencing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Margaret. Okay, one final question because we're getting close to our time here. So as we launch the Migration History Campaign for America's 250th, what's one thing you want the public or Congress, the administration, take your pick, to understand about immigration that you think is currently not enough of a part of the conversation? Galen, maybe we'll start with you. What would you like the public or Congress or the administration to understand about immigration?
Well, I think we've been talking about it all hour long, and that is to understand that as we've said, immigrants are people, people are assets, and immigrants aren't just average people. Immigrants are special people. They're people that have the gumption to pick up their lives and move to a new country, learn a new language, cross all kinds of barriers because of a vision of a better life. And oftentimes those are those are very American values, but they've been cultivated by waves and waves of immigrants throughout our history. And so to cut that off is really to turn away from our own heritage.
Thanks, Galen. Stuart, how about you? What's something that you wish the American people understood better about immigration?
Well, with small fixes to the immigration system, we could have more people come in legally, abiding by the rules. I think that's what people think is important to do. But there actually have to be rules in place that allow people to come in the way they normally come in, which we haven't seen. And related to that is that we need more people to come into the United States to fill niches in labor force and also to supply the labor force growth that's going to improve standard living for people as immigration has done throughout American history.
Thanks, Stuart. Margaret, how about you?
Well, we talked about it a little at the beginning, but I think many Americans are surprised to find out how many immigrants are serving in the military and how important their contributions have been. And it's not just strictly military issues either. Stuart was talking about the sports analogy. Well, the first immigrant to win the 5,000-meter race and get a medal in the Olympics for the United States was a military person, a U.S. Army soldier who had joined the military at a time when the military was welcoming immigrants. And he ended up getting 2 medals in the Olympics for the United States of America because he got his citizenship through military service, a silver medal and a bronze medal in an event that the U.S. otherwise could not even get medal placement in and hadn't for decades. So I would like more people to be aware of the contributions of immigrants serving in our national security area. And again, it's not just the military members themselves, but their family members are a big asset to the United States and to our national security. Our Afghan allies, I think people need to be paying more attention to what's going on with those folks. And immigrants, again, are critical to our national security. They are not a liability. We do have the methods, means, and techniques for keeping the bad guys out, but there's no reason for keeping the good guys out too. That's throwing the baby out with the bathwater, overuse the metaphor.
Thank you, Margaret. So I'm going to give each of our panelists a chance to give one last closing statement, and I'll give them a chance to decide what they might want to say. But thank you all for joining our webinar today. We invite you to please join the forum's America's 250 campaign. And to do that, you can visit our website, forumtogether.org/250, where you can download our history of immigration document and lots of tools to urge Congress to pass a fair, firm, and compassionate immigration solution. So do any of our panelists have a final word that they'd like to share?
Well, I think probably most of the people who've joined this webinar already are engaged with immigrants, know people who are immigrants, but perhaps an encouragement to reach out to any of your immigrant friends with a word of encouragement if this may be a difficult time for them. And not just for ones who are undocumented. I know lots of people that they, even when they go to a neighboring state, they bring their passport just because they don't want to get, caught up in an ICE raid. And so that's an extra weight. So to let them know that they're valued, they're appreciated, we're glad they're here, and what can we do to help?
Thank you, Galen. Stuart, any closing word?
Sure. To return to a point we were discussing earlier, that the restrictions on immigration that were being imposed, and more generally, end up being restrictions on American citizens, limiting their ability to have someone work for them, to be able to teach them, to possibly to marry them and live with them. As we've seen throughout history, you could actually, some of the names that we've talked about in the past can be traced as part of American history. So we don't want to look at immigrants as just a big faceless number of people, but you go from Thomas Paine, you could go to Alexander Graham Bell, Andy Grove, who was one of the founders of Intel, and then more recently, Katalin Karikó, who won the Nobel Prize and helped save many lives with her research on messenger RNA, which helped during COVID and is helping with cancer research today as well.
Thanks, Stuart. Okay, Margaret, the final word is yours.
All right, I'll throw out a name too. So a former refugee came to the United States many decades ago and rose through the ranks of the military, became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, John Shalikashvili. That's been the story of the military as an institution. It's been enormously successful at integrating immigrants, making them part of the American dream, making them want to fight for their country, their new country. And they've been tremendously loyal to the United States, much better behaved, believe it or not, than native-born American citizens, because they don't take it for granted. As Galen was saying earlier, these are people that had the personality characteristics to get up and go from where they were and come to a new country and try to integrate. And part of that is they really do believe in the Constitution and the promise of the Declaration of Independence. And I've had people sit in my office and just tell me that bluntly that, I love America because I read the Declaration of Independence and I read the Constitution and I think it's unbelievable and I want to be part of this American dream. And we want to continue to repeat that to people because that's the strength of America. It's part of our national security that we have this promise that causes other people to want to be part of us.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, thank you again to Margaret and Stuart and Galen for your time and expertise. This has been a rich experience for me, a rich learning experience, and I hope it was for our audience as well. And again, if you'd like to get involved in the Forum's America's 250 activities, please visit forumtogether.org/250. And thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll talk to you again soon. Take care, everybody.